Yeah, I'm Jackson. I have zero experience with carpentry.
I studied at a school for historic preservation in Boston and learned about how things were built, 250 years ago.
There's a long way to go. I'm nowhere near the top. Not that I thought I was, but there's so much more to do out there.
Welcome back to this episode of Passion for Craft podcast. Today we are talking about a really cool article that our producer Austin found by the British architect Quinlan Terry. It's on his website. It's really cool. And it's talking about sustainability, longevity, a little bit of build science stuff there. It was like a 5-point article that basically talked about the different reasons for why building and refurbishing old stuff better is the better option from a sustainability, from an economical or like a ecological standpoint. Just making sure that, we're being conscientious to the earth that we live in. So kind of a fun article, but the 5 main points was longevity itself. So in the buildings that we build with stone, with wood, with natural materials, aka not PVC, plexiglass, aluminum, steel, all that kind of stuff.
Or even concrete.
That was another one of them. Will last longer if you use those original materials, and so you're not dealing with this cycle.
Smaller carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's one of the later ones. But also it just says one of the crazy things about it is that it's going to last longer, and in replacing it over and over again, you're not replacing it with bad materials that are going to die another 20 years. So manufacturing is the second point. So like carbon emissions that you use when you manufacture PVC, aluminum, concrete, all this other stuff, if you're replacing them every 20 years, you're manufacturing new ones every 20 years to go into the house. And so it's a lot more carbon emissions rather than just taking stuff from the earth, taking wood, taking limestone, brick, anyway, those kind of things.
And I've looked up PVC manufacturing.
Yeah.
It's like a cliche, ominous factory in the distance with smokestacks. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
It's just burning plastics.
Most plastics are
it's
a pretty nasty
really
process.
Bad.
Yeah.
So even though it may last longer, which we don't know yet, which I think we talked about this too, we don't know how long PVC is going to last, but we do know that it's a big smokestack in the
Yeah, and even if it does last longer, the carbon footprint is still bigger for using it because of what it takes to create it.
Yeah, one thing I was surprised to hear is that concrete is not sustainable, and I heard you say the pier and beam foundation is better, which I was also surprised. I thought a slab foundation was better.
What's the difference between the two?
Better
slab.
Better, longer lasting, because I always thought of pier and beams shifting and kind of falling apart, and I mean I know they last, but how can you beat a slab of concrete? That's kind of
so
you know what I mean?
I thought pier and beam was still using concrete. It
is
okay. You set a piece of wood into concrete
historically.
Okay.
I guess I was just surprised by that.
Well, I mean, you think about when did slab foundations start?
In the 40s.
In 50s with the production building, right? Levitt and all those guys used slab foundations because it was cheap and fast. And so it's easier to do, takes less skill. And so that's when it started. So if you want to just compare these, building traditions and things like that, I mean, you can look at when they started doing it and start getting a clue into the differences, right? And so if you are, and so when you say better, you can have bad slab foundations, you can have bad pier and beam foundations. Part of the problem in North Texas is that we have expansive soils. We got a lot of clay in our soil. So when it gets wet, it expands. When it dries out, it shrinks. And so that's the reason why you might look at pier and beam foundations and go, oh, they're not really very good, is because we're looking at houses that are 100 years old and they've moved over that time, especially in North Texas. And so there's cracks in the brick, there's cracks in the foundation. And so they're like, oh man, this thing's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't done a deep dive into, which one's better, which one's worse. If someone wants to build a really great house, we're building it with a pier and beam foundation.
Mm-hmm.
One, I mean, you have the accessibility underneath your house to, fix things when they go wrong. And so it's a much more, fixable house.
And you can remodel it easier.
Yeah. And so I can't sit there and look a person in the eye and say, your slab foundation sucks, right? Because it doesn't. It works. But I've got a client who wants to build a house next year, and he assumed that everything would be slab, and I said, no, we want to do pier and beam, and he was blown away. And this is an experienced homeowner who's built a number of houses, but had never had anybody say we really need to be pier and beam. Will a slab foundation last 100 years? Yeah, I mean, my house is now 50 years old. I don't think the slab foundation is going to fail, right? But you have less
customization you can do.
Yeah, and it's easier to work on, and easier.
Definitely.
It's like, I don't know what the analogy would be, but you're not giving your house as much flexibility long term as you can with a pier and beam.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we'll both we'll both be engineered to stand up. We'll both do the job. Yeah. And so, but I mean, there's an architect in Dallas that calls building on a slab building tents, right? That you're not really, you're building
You're just on the ground.
Yeah. This thing on the ground. So anyway, it's a little, I feel like there's a little bit of snobbery for me to sit there and go, you need to have to. But you look at the tradition of how both evolved and everything else, and I think it's a better construction piece. Now,
I didn't know you were camping here.
I don't. So, but for someone who this guy's wants to build a $5 million plus house, right?
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage him to build with a pier and beam. Someone's building a $500,000 house. I don't think the money's worth it
Because it's more expensive.
It's more expensive to do, and so but I've never done the complete breakout in the math to find out
exactly
whether it's 20% more, 10% more, or 50% more. And so, but I mean, if you're building a $500,000 house and your slab foundation's $30,000, a pier and beam's going to be at least 60 or 80. And so,
I guess
cut cost there.
I guess I'm just surprised to hear. You read the thing out loud yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
the article that we're talking about, and in there he said that concrete wasn't sustainable, and I'm like, how is that?
Well,
like,
the
it
carbon,
seems like
they're
it'll last.
trying to make better concrete now because the carbon emissions in concrete is really bad. Okay,
Really?
so the CO2 that it puts out when you're making concrete is bad.
Now, is this
So
the powder, or when you're actually like setting it and like adding water to it? Like, what part of the process is that? Like, is it a chemical thing that's released when you set it?
Yes.
Okay.
The CO2 that comes off when it's drying and
Yeah.
everything else. Okay, mixing it. So they are trying to, and a lot of people are trying to make a better concrete. Okay, that isn't so hard for this. But
Okay.
look, you didn't even get through all the things: the thermal mass, the ability of the parts to be demolished and recycled.
Well, yeah.
Thermal movement.
Just to continue, thermal mass is talking about the heat retained in the winter and then the cold retained in the summer. It's easier to.
No, that's the thermal movement. The thermal mass.
That was what he said in his article.
The thermal mass is the fact that the width of the walls, okay, when you build traditionally, have a thermal mass that allows them to retain heat, retain cool. What you're saying, the thermal movement is the cooling of those buildings, and the he talks about the Italian villas that you go into in the summertime, and they're nice and cool inside.
Well, one of the other things he said, recently built a house in Texas with thick walls and high ceilings. It's already been noticed that the air conditioning requirement is very considerably lower than with modern stick construction of thin walls with no thermal mass.
So, but here's where I'm going, because I don't think people are understanding from reading these points what we're talking about, okay?
Yeah.
Because really what we're talking about is what our podcast is about, okay? Because Quinlan Terry, if you look at his work, okay, he's a snob of a classical architect, okay? And we've told the stories about him with the mortar joints and all that stuff, but he fights for this traditional building method, okay? In this house in Texas, the Muse Mansion it's one of the finest houses I've ever been in, okay? It has single pane windows, okay? Why did he put in single pane windows? Okay, well, insulated glass windows fail. And so he can't, when he stood up and announced this house at the very first ICA of Texas meeting, okay, the architect introduced him and said, this house will last 250 years. And he stood up and said, no, it's going to last 450 years, right? And so he is talking about how to, and it's what I try to talk about. I was very inspired by him and
Have you met him?
I have, but it's just a handshake. Hey, thank you for coming. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Quinlan, we'd love to have you on the podcast.
So it's he's talking about what we're talking about, right? This passion for craft. He's talking about the reason we want to go through these things is because he highlights in 5 quick points, right, in a paragraph on his website, exactly the philosophy for what we're talking about when we're building. That if you build the old ways, learning from the past, you have buildings that last longer. You have buildings that have a smaller carbon footprint. You have buildings that heat and cool better. You have buildings that are better, okay? And I know all my buddies on the Build Show, they chase these metrics that I want net zero and everything else. I would argue that going towards this sustainability and long lasting is a better way of building, okay? Certainly it has a better track record. I say better. It has a longer track record because he's talking about buildings. He's talking about, if you've been to Italy and you walk through those houses, they are magical.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the other kind of like quote unquote thesis of this episode is, the thing that he's talking about are strictly from an ecological standpoint and like carbon footprint wise. Like I think a lot of people make the argument that, they're net zero emissions, they're all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times that doesn't necessarily mean net zero emissions doesn't mean zero emissions. It just means we're going to offset those emissions that we've put into the thing by donating to companies that are going to offset our emissions and other stuff like that. I don't think that's what,
net zero is a goal that your house doesn't consume any energy.
Right.
Okay. So there is.
I'm just saying there's different. My point is saying that is there's different metrics to getting to net zero and like the way that they kind of find that math.
But corporately, and the companies that buy carbon credits is a different thing than the guys trying to build a net zero house.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to argue that I think we're talking about this today because I think he very succinctly laid out a powerful argument for what we're talking about, right? And we talk about craft, we talk about the death of craft, we talked about, ways of building, and if you watch our work and the extra time we're taking to build things, our 100-year window, why are we doing that? And he just makes this ecological point that because it's better for everybody. It's better for our environment. And if we just take a few of his points that we really haven't stressed and go through them and just talk about them, I think they're powerful. He talks about restoration as well. He talks about saving houses, that if you, it's much better to take an historic house and restore it than it is to tear it down and build something new. One, the historic house has already been there 100 years and will probably last another 100 years. The house that they're putting up,
if restored well, true. And the new house, if it's typical of the way new houses are built today, might last 30 years, right? 50 years, but even if it's restored well,
even if it's built well, right? And so, right, that alone, right? It's just it should. We are a tear down, make it new society. I made the point in my book, The Timeless House, is that we went to France. The south of France and looked at this lady's house. It was from the 1600s. 1600s, okay? 500 years old this century. And there was a hole in the middle of the room, okay? In this wonderful tile floor, there was a hole that was cemented over. In the past, it had been a drain or it had been, a toilet. Who knows what it was, okay? But today, our thing would be well, we got to get a new floor. Let's tear the whole thing out and put a new floor in. There's a hole in the floor.
We definitely would do that.
We definitely would do that. And so, but they would look at it and go, no, these tiles are 500 years old. I'm not going to, just because there's a hole in the floor, I'd rather it be a patch than to tear all this out and put something new in.
Yeah.
That isn't going to last long.
Nicer materials, though. We don't feel so bad about throwing away vinyl.
No, no. I mean,
there might be some to that.
There was a house we did in Highland Park that this
Shout out if you were this homeowner.
Couple came along and bought this house. No, it's not the homeowner's fault.
I'm just kidding.
It's that the prices that you can get in Highland Park for a house, right? $500, $800, $1,000 a square foot for a house, right? Is pennies on the dollar in some respects, because they took this house, is built in the 80s, and the person, in order to sell it, they'd been in there 20 years. They completely redid the kitchen, they redid the baths, they redid with all these new things. And so,
in order to sell it.
In order to sell it, okay?
Wow.
Now, our couple came along and bought it, and we started looking at those materials, and it was nice, countertops in stone. It was nice cabinets, newly painted. It was new fixtures. It was new stuff. They tore it all out. And it was so gross. I mean, I'm still talking about it. It was gross the way we were just so wasteful. And they probably spent, at least $500,000 fixing up this house in order to sell it. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And we tore it out. And we just, so not only did we tore out $500,000 worth of new stuff, but it was new. It was, a month old, 3 months old.
Yeah.
And I was just going, there's got to be a better way to be doing this.
So the person who sold it should probably just not fix it up,
should
right?
not have, right? Well,
If you got good bones.
But then, but then, look at it from their math. Okay, they spent, let's say they spent $2 million on the house 20 years ago, and they're ready to sell it. It's worth $4 million. But if they put $500,000 in, it's worth $5 million.
Good investment.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they're gonna make more money if they put just a little bit of money into it. And so it doesn't make it's frustrating, because we're sitting there going, it's so wasteful. Okay, but I also see the math of it, and I see why they did it. But it's an example of how societally we are so wasteful. We want always new stuff. I'm looking at a house, just looked at an historic house from the 20s, and the mosaic, small, beautiful blue and white floor had a crack in it. Okay. Well, we got to tear it out.
Yeah.
Can we not just live with that crack?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's that Japanese art form called? Where maybe it's Chinese, I don't remember it, but they take a vase or an urn and they shatter it.
And they put it back
and then
together.
they put it together with gold lines in between them all.
Ooh, that's cool.
It's really cool, but it kind of is this idea of like there's beauty in mistakes.
Yeah.
And like there's some good to have in that. And they even take that over to like drawing styles and other stuff. It's like when you're drawing, you might make a mistake. It's not scrap the whole drawing. It's like that mistake has added character to the whole piece.
And
so it's
we
exactly that.
We are
just don't have
talking
that
about
mindset.
there's a reason why this guy is from London, okay, and not the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we don't build the way they build over there.
Let me just highlight one of the things. This is exactly what you just said. In your talk, in your example of that Highland Park family. It says the ability to be recycled. Buildings today only last a few decades and have to be demolished. Demolition produces a lot of material that has to be transported to a licensing ship, not to mention problems of disposing the new materials like asbestos and worn out refrigerators. And so it talks about how traditional buildings have what are the materials that we're disposing of in them? Wood, rock, mortar, maybe,
And
and he's saying it goes back into the ground and it's fine.
it goes back into the ground. It's fine.
But
and
he's
then you don't
also-
have to take it to a dump.
But he's also saying that you can take those houses, and because of the materials, and you can reuse them.
And that's another one of his points. You don't need to go take it to, whatever. If you are getting rid of it, it goes back in the earth. And if you're not getting rid of it, you can actually take the exact thing that's there and just make it better. You can sand it down, get a new layer on it, whatever.
Did you guys ever see the Book of Eli?
Yes.
You
No.
didn't.
Yeah. We saw it together.
watch
You,
any
me, and
movies.
Gaddis and Thomas House saw that.
Book of Eli is Denzel
Awesome.
Washington, post-apocalyptic time,
Is it Denzel too? That dude's the best.
and post-apocalyptic period of time, and he makes an offhanded comment to one of the other characters in the movie, just how wasteful we used to be, and he's walking through this post-apocalyptic trying to save. It's about a book, but he's trying to save things, and he just shakes his head at how wasteful we were, and that
Which means we are, because it's
Right,
post-apocalyptic,
right.
so it's a future set movie. So it's like commentary on today.
right, and it struck me, and because we throw away so much stuff. I remember we went and visited. We had an exchange student when I was in high school. We went and visited him in Switzerland, where he was from. And we went to his apartment. First of all the Swiss people have to be in the army, and so he had like a pistol and an AR or M1,
Yeah.
whatever he had in his house. He was breaking it down for us, showing it. It was pretty
That's
cool.
awesome.
But he was throwing trash away, and he had like this little milk carton. Okay, and he didn't just throw the milk carton today. He broke it down, he folded it, he put it into this little, this little thing, and then carefully almost filed it into the trash can.
Like a game of Tetris.
Yeah, and so we were just kind of looking at him going, what are you doing? He goes, well, we got to, the trash here, you get charged for this. And I was like, we do too, but we don't do that.
We're just like throwing bottles.
Yeah.
I mean, there is definitely an American versus a European way of building and way of thinking and how we do things. But anyway, it's I don't know in this conversation how you bring about change, right? This
It's
is
a mentality.
I think
it's totally a mentality.
You
You're
have
not
to
going to
change your
change it.
mind.
It's like we're wrapped up around costs right now. We're the Walmartization of our lives. I had a guy comment on one of my YouTube videos. He said, boy, that 4-piece crown is awesome, but I guess it costs more. I was like, yeah, it costs more because
You
there's
got it
4
right.
pieces, not 1 piece, and there's 4 of them, and it takes more work to put them up. But there's a reason why you like it.
Yeah.
And he's all caught up in the cost. Well, that'll cost more. Yes, it will.
And then, a big one that I get is like when I'm doing stuff and like putting stuff together, people are like, well, what about whenever, the next person has to come and rip it out? I'm like, you're already thinking about ripping it out. You already want to throw it away. Just put it in. Is it that bad?
we had a guy.
Does it really look that bad? Yeah.
One of the jobs we did, that Pennsylvania farmhouse, they had to rebuild the deck, and he had a different carpentry crew come out, and we had built the columns on this porch, and this porch was rotting. It wasn't done well. That's a different story. And the carpenter said he was taking apart these columns, and he was like, these are the most well-built, unbelievably, crafted columns I've ever taken apart. And the homeowner was telling me this story because he was thankful that we had spent some time doing that. But to the contrast to your point, sometimes if we build things so well, it will inspire the next person who comes along, that they look at it and they go, oh, wow, this is really cool. Look at the time that these guys spent doing this. Look how they put this together.
Yeah.
I better put it back together right.
Yes.
So it can be inspiring too.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Taking stuff apart and like, whoa.
Yeah.
Exactly what you just said.
We've all been there, right?
Mm-hmm. Even me. I really have. I really have.
The other piece on this thing is, we've talked about it before. I was glad to see him
Iterate.
Well, just reinforce that statement about glass. And the I get so much pushback about insulated glass. We fight it over and over again in every jurisdiction we go to, even with clients. Oh, but it's in single pane. And I can't get them past. There's such a
It's in the mind.
it's in their mind. I can't get it. Well, wait, everybody uses insulated glass. Why would we not? Well, because it doesn't last. I mean, he says 5 years. I think it's longer than that. But
No. His saying is they're only guaranteed for 5 years.
oh, that's true. And
So-
that is also true.
But that even says a lot about the company that's double glazing your glass for you. if they're going to be,
Like we can't even warranty it.
well, we're not going to warranty it past 5 years because we know it fails. It's a money losing operation. It's like,
I got a quote.
okay, great.
I got a quote for glass the other day on this. I found this window. It's a metal window. I'm putting it together, and it's just like, give me a quote on single pane, tempered, double pane or whatever. And the insulated was $1,600, and the single pane was like $200. So it's like, that stuff is so expensive too. Yeah. This was just this week.
Well, I just think it's so important to read what this guy said, and then we can just talk about it a little more, because Quinlan really nicely says how he says double glazing, which is insulated glass, right? Where you've got two panes. Mm-hmm. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. So it says double glazing, contrary to what it said, is doubly harmful for two reasons. First, it encourages architects to build entire walls of glass when they should build solid walls with smaller windows. And that's from a thermal mass and thermal load standpoint, or thermal movement standpoint, because if you're heating up a house with giant windows that's just getting colder and colder by the minute, it's like, why are you insulating it when instead you should just build a wall and then put a window in it? It's like, that'll keep the heat in. You'll spend less money. You'll spend it's money over time. Anyway, so when you should build solid walls with smaller windows. And the second, the seals on the double glazing are only guaranteed for 5 years. So the environmental cost of frequent re-glazing is unsustainable. Even some modernist architects acknowledge that an insulated brick wall with punched windows would beat a glass wall hands down in the energy saving stakes. So
there's going to be a revamp at some point. Okay, this pendulum's going to swing the other way. But right now, we are in an environmentally where the Apple Store glass box is cool. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. And to his point, do you realize how wasteful that space is? Do you realize how inefficient it is? Do you realize how much the carbon footprint of trying to heat and cool that space versus this other space? Think of all the glass towers that are built today. If you just totally put on the lens of energy efficiency, we wouldn't allow those buildings to be built. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't. They're terrible buildings. They're terrible. And so they take so much more energy to heat and cool. They break, they fail, these things like that. And
and they require maintenance every 5 years.
So these buildings here, and when it's 20, 30, 40 years old, it gets torn down. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we're so
jump back to these buildings here just before you.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, one, he's building a traditional building.
So this is a Quinlan Terry building that we're looking at here. It's a traditional building. It's an industrial building. It's not a.
What do you mean it's an industrial building?
It's not a home. That's not a house.
I think those are apartments.
Okay, so it is. Is it? Anyway, commercial building. Yes, is what I meant. Sorry, I said industrial. It says Jackson on the side there. That's pretty dope.
Maybe it's yours.
Thanks, Quinlan.
There was a study done in New York. I can't remember whether we've talked about it, about the most energy efficient buildings in New York. Mm-hmm. And modern architects don't want to know this broadcast very loud, but the most energy efficient buildings were the buildings built before 1950. And so because those buildings were brick and they had smaller windows, to his point, and they were the thermal efficiency of those things was great compared to the glass boxes that they're building today. And so
you would think there'd be like some kind of law.
You would think there would be a backlash. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And just even environmentally.
Yeah. Like just if you had that long lens on only, you would say there's no way anybody should be able to build that. And yet we're building them all the time and tearing them down.
Well,
that's garbage.
So it hits like 4 different times because the material that's used on it is not a environmentally friendly material, right? Glass gets a B or a C rating according to like environmental friendliness, according to Quinlan Terry. So that might be a London metric, but whereas brick, stone, and all these other things get like an A in environmental friendliness. And so then when you got the glazing itself, which is like a chemical compound that put together to resist all the stuff and bond and seal things together, that's the material that's the most economically or ecologically volatile chemical that's in the equation. So that's like a C, maybe D rating in terms of, sustainability. Then you're spending more money or spending more carbon emissions to warm the house or heat the house or, do whatever you need to do to get it to the right temperature. And then on top of that, whenever you get rid of it, it's also wasteful to the environment because glass is not a very sustainable, or sustainable is the wrong word.
But here's the deal.
It's just all three. It's wrapped up together. It's like, it's not just the one angle of like from
part of the reason
why,
part of the reason why I don't think we've had this conversation yet is because
it's so obvious.
I think because it's we're not programmed to even think about that, and I think the Europeans are more programmed to care about that than we are. The
classic European program.
I look at that his buildings, and I just go, wow, that's beautiful. Okay, the proportions, the scale, the materials. It's beautiful, and so I get more passionate about the craft, the beauty, the design, right? Than I am, because that's the road we've been chasing. The Passion and Craft podcast is about building better, and he has kind of pivoted on us and said, ecologically, these buildings are terrible, right? Why are we building these? And so
old buildings, not old buildings, new builds.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, although his is a new build too.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, in any case, I just think, okay, so what? Okay, what do our listeners do? What do we? What's the point here? Is it to provide them information that like we're doing? Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that ecologically, right? Is that the point that we're trying to press on them, or what should they be doing?
I think the biggest takeaway is yes, that it's like, even it's not just beauty that supports the theory that this is the right way to be building. Like it's not just that. There's a litany of other reasons. And so I think the point of this episode as a whole is like, just from an ecological standpoint, look at all the other reasons why you should be building classically and not otherwise. But then look how beautiful classical looks. So this is by a guy who builds classically, who builds well classically. And so to your point, like, this isn't an episode about Quinlan Terry's architecture, though I think we should talk about it, and we can spend the remainder of this episode talking and looking at some of his houses and why they're beautiful. But on top of that, it's like, it's an added cherry on top, that it's like, look at all this other stuff that's why we shouldn't build in new ways.
I almost feel like there's like two camps. There's like the beauty camp, which is what I would say we are more. And then there's like the net zero camp. And like the two are kind of like,
the Venn diagram overlaps more than it looks like.
Yeah. And like you said, there's a pendulum swinging. So I think what we do in this episode, I guess the point of it is change the minds of people to get it to swing back towards the other way. Because if you have these people who are like, yeah, all that stuff's cool about your 100-year window, but the single pane glass, I just can't do it. But if they knew what he's saying and they knew the truth about it, they'd be like, you could win people over from that side.
Yeah. I mean, especially from the build science side.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, that's all they care about is the build science.
So but that's exactly what's being said.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
Because the old ways are better.
So here's some examples, okay? Decks, okay, on houses, wood decks. People are building them all the time, okay? I would say, based on what we believe and what we're doing, people shouldn't be building wood decks.
Shouldn't
be building wood decks. They're disposable.
Kind of gave us a little trip up. Shouldn't be. Got there in the end, but it took a while.
Did I?
It was kind of confusing. Should or shouldn't?
We should not build wood decks on our houses.
Why not? Explain.
They're disposable. They're a 10-year product. Okay. So what should you be building? You should be building stone patios. Okay. We shouldn't build. And so I'm throwing it out there because I know it's controversial, right? And I know there's people that want to build wood decks, and their industry is building wood decks. I'm just saying, 10 years later, you've got a problem in the backyard because your deck either needs to be redone and so are we really building 10-year solutions? We apparently are, and we don't care. And so it's Ecologically, the carbon footprint, we're doing it over and over and over and over again, right? Now we're using wood. Maybe people are using Trex and other things like that.
We actually have this perfect example of this at Grandma and Grandpa's place at the lake house. So like his parents own this great lake property, but one house has a wooden deck and then one has a composite deck. I don't know, but it's like green. It doesn't look
okay. So
that one's breaking down. Both are breaking down at the similar rate. Like both have been around for the same amount of time.
But here's the deal, and maybe this is the point.
Yeah.
The lake house is a we're there for 3 months out of the year at the most, 2 months out of the year. It is a summer only kind of thing, and we rebuild docks, we rebuild, and we do that. I mean, so here I am saying we shouldn't be doing that, and we've done it, and we continue to do it. So I'm telling people, I'm tipping my hand that I know we shouldn't be doing this, but we're doing it anyway. But I would say that my point is that I think my caveat would be that we shouldn't be building wood decks on houses that are supposed to be there for a long time, right? And so if you've got a pre-1940 house, or you have there's probably a price point, $1 million house. There's no wood decks on your house. There should be a material ladder hierarchy that changes. But I think there is I think there's a lot of things like that. I can't think of it. Maybe kitchens are another example of things that are 10-year, 20-year product that we throw away all the time that people redo, right? And so,
because there is kind of like a high swing of trends that comes through kitchens. Like it's a high rate of change.
So many things on our houses are like that. That the flippers are a good example. They go into these historic houses and they rip out all the good stuff and put in new things, right? And they ruin houses a lot of times.
And then we get to go buy it from Old Home Supply.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. No.
So,
but yeah,
right? I mean,
so. But my point with that, with just the side-by-side comparison of the two things, is like, even still, one of those has a higher ecological footprint than the other one. Like the composite material, throwing that away is
I would say they're equally disposable.
Yes. Equally disposable.
But one is
worse
bad for our environment.
And one looks better. Like we're at the end of the line on both of those decks, and I know we don't have photos of these, but one looks terrible. The composite wood is like bending and sagging and it's flaking and it's gross. And then the actual wooden deck, I mean, we've sanded it down a bunch of times and like gotten it good. It's probably on its last leg, but it looks good.
But that's an example of a product you can restore and fix, right?
Right.
We can't do anything with that composite deck now that
except for replace it.
Except for throw it away.
Yeah.
And he was saying in his thing, like if it decays, like it'll just go into the ground.
Yeah.
Versus the plastic is just gonna stay there looking like crap forever.
Yeah. It's never goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of like this direction we're going. What other things are we wasting money on, right? What other things? Windows, I think, are a good example.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think windows are the most prominent example that's in everyone's world. Like I'm outside of the builder world enough, but I get Renewal by Anderson. Shout out. Ads.
I'm working on a deal with them right now. Be
all
careful.
the time. Oh yeah, sorry. They're terrible.
No,
but I think everyone sees them. I think everyone 25 to
sadly
on.
Though, everybody looks at it like they get those things and they go, yeah, I really need to replace my windows. Right?
And they're the only place they can go.
That's the first thought that you have, that all of a sudden they have put into our vocabulary, put into our minds that, if you want your house to be energy efficient, you want these things, you need to replace your windows.
Yeah.
So they've changed the conversation on us,
oh
right?
My gosh.
They've changed the whole paradigm, so that all of a sudden now we're saying, well, it's an old house, got to replace the windows. I can't tell you how many people I go to their houses and they go, well, we know got to replace the windows. And I'm like, you don't, right? You don't have to.
But our windows aren't metal. What do you mean we don't have to replace them?
But our windows are old, right? Our window, okay.
They're still wooden. What do I do with it?
Yeah, and so anyway, it's just
isn't that the trend?
It's just
not plastic or metal. They're not working.
Well, like think about the entry doors from like the big box stores. They're so garbage.
Yeah,
and they're Like you can see like the caulking of the
Well,
glass around.
the people are.
Well, leaning on you, what are the other things? What are some more stuff in that category?
Well, I think the doors is a good
doors.
example. I think the changing your entry door, and those companies are pushing these. And I know why, right? They're pushing the plastics and the things because they're low maintenance,
You don't
right?
even paint it. It's already pre-painted.
It's pre-painted and pre-done. You don't have to.
You can't paint it.
And for some reason, we've gotten on this kick that we want something with such low maintenance that
We're lazy, man.
just maintenance is actually
so
something
lazy.
that if you think about these historic houses, or you think about anything that's beautiful, okay, anything that's beautiful, car, okay, a beautiful car needs maintenance. Or you don't own a 62 Corvette and not expect to change the oil, pump up the tires, keep the engine running.
Yeah, it's like a childish mentality. I remember thinking like when I get a car, I'll drive anywhere. I didn't know you had to put gas.
Yeah.
And I remember that too about the computer. Like I didn't know you had to pay for internet. Like once you have a computer, you have internet.
Right.
It was like
That's
so
funny.
childish.
That's a good point. I had the same thing with iPads.
There
You
is.
gotta pay for internet.
But think about the phone and the
Yeah.
iPad and stuff. You have automatic updates happening all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Your phone, you got to turn it off. You got a new update. That's maintenance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, it's taken out of our hands, right?
Right.
But you still have maintenance. And there's nothing good that doesn't have maintenance.
I also remember.
Wait, is that a true statement?
Yeah.
I agree.
Is there anything that's good that doesn't require maintenance?
Nothing.
Even working out is maintenance for yourself.
Yeah.
Truly, yeah.
Just on this technology point, just as y'all are brainstorming other stuff, on the maintenance side of things, I remember when you used to have to plug in your phone and get a new update. And I'm specifically talking iPhones because prior to that, phones were, you just had them until they fell apart and then whatever. But with an iPhone, I remember the first couple of updates. I remember iOS 7 coming out and like plugging into my computer that night and being like jazzed because I was like, I'm going to get to see the new features tomorrow when I update. And so it was like an exploratory thing of like, let me look at the new features. Now, I could not tell you what iOS we're on. Like I couldn't tell you what
13.
Apple, that might be the iPhone that we're at, but I think we're past 17. But to my point, I don't think anyone knows. Whereas it used to be a conversation of like, oh my gosh, 7 comes out tomorrow. Let's figure this out. And then it was an exploratory thing where I knew the ins and outs of my phone a lot better because I had to do maintenance on it. And I think the same kind of thing happens in the house where like, hey, my window's falling apart. I need to do maintenance on it.
Another one is siding, okay?
Yeah.
And people want to put hardy or plastic on the side of their house because they don't want to have to paint again, okay? And they don't want to have to do these things. And so they put
that cement board.
I hate it. And so talk about
what's
a product.
so bad about it?
Well, talk about a product that has a terrible carbon emission and off gases and everything else. It's terrible for the environment to make it, okay? And so and all because they want low maintenance or no maintenance. And it's just like,
You're shooting yourself in the foot with that. You think you're getting something and you're getting the opposite. It's like the window thing and the cement board, hardy, whatever. Like I was doing something in my back door. I might have even told you guys this, but I popped the trim off around the exterior door because I was switching it from a left hand to a right hand swing. Yeah. And I just pushing the pry bar against the cladding that it just crumbled.
Just folded over.
Yeah, I'm just like, nah. I'm just like, I have to replace all of this.
What kind of siding was it?
Cement board, with like a wood impression stamped on
it. Which is so ironic. We've talked about that before. But just like
embrace the fake.
Yeah, just get something that's real. Well, this one looks real. Wait.
And on the off-gas topic, I mean, fake floors as well, right? Like the
MDFs and the vinyls and the other things.
Oh, yeah, it smells like that because of off-gassing. Like, that can't be good. That's not exciting.
No, it's terrible. So, sadly, this has only exposed all this terrible things we do in building that are so wasteful. And we do it all the time. I suspect
someone's doing it right
half
now.
the remodeling industry is siding, kitchens, windows, and doors.
Mm-hmm.
Is replacement of those things, roofs. Roofs would be another.
So Quinlan Terry ends
maybe
his article.
3/4 of the remodeling. Yeah.
He ends his article with a really funny question. Where do we go from here? He says, there's an alternative which has worked and proved itself for over 4,000 years. It's called traditional building construction. Solid masonry, modest height, pitched slate, tile roofs, smaller windows. It's beautiful and sustainable, and it's architectural expression of every civilization until now. So, I mean, it's just like, where do we go from here? What do we do with
here's the
this?
problem with that, okay?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, just kidding.
No. He's right. I agree with that. But you're talking what that means is that houses will be more expensive to build, okay? And you will have less ownership of houses, okay? So we're at like 60 or 70% of home ownership in America. It'll probably drop down to 40, okay? Is that worth it?
I disagree. I actually want to push back on that.
Really?
100%. Because we're right now at a point where, to your point, you say this all the time. Whenever you're doing new projects with people, your project managers and your people go, well, how do we do that? Well, no one does that. Well, no one's in that. If we have a pendulum shift to where right now it's like 10% of the population does traditional building techniques and like provides the stuff for
1%.
that. Sure, 1%. 99% is doing these newfangled techniques and all this other stuff. So
You're saying if they're trained that way, they could do it.
I'm just saying the production lines exist in a way that is leaning towards the 99%. There's no major productioners or major producers, that's the word, of
Productioners.
yeah, no major productioners of all of these like traditional building things. Like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, like to be able to find cool moldings, to be able to find, like imagine if there were 300,000 shops that existed that did what you do. Like the availability and the cost of it would be a lot cheaper.
I know what you're saying. I mean,
So it does make everything come cheaper if we're doing solid masonry all the time.
no, you're
Like,
right.
you
I
know
mean,
what I'm
the
saying?
masonry in Texas is fairly cheap, and I talk to people in New England or in Kansas or something like that, and they go, "Oh, we can't get good masons here."
Right.
and it's just because they don't do it a lot.
Right.
So
I think there can be a
some
shift.
truth in that. I don't think there's. I still don't think home
I
ownership
agree.
stays where it is.
I think you're right in that like when you break it down to the very, very like base, PVC and like fake MDF, like whatever, all that will always be cheaper than the regular.
It's actually not cheaper. Like those deck floors
just
are
kidding.
more expensive than wood. Like that Trex is more expensive than a wood deck.
Well, sorry, bad example, but what I'm saying is like some of these alternatives will always be cheaper. Like plastics will always be cheaper across the board than wood, right?
No,
Then why does it cost so much? What I'm saying
because
is true.
people are chasing after AZEC. Is more expensive.
It's more sought after, I guess, now.
Then I guess what I'm saying is true. Then that wood will be like if the production lines shift, that seems to be the only barrier. Then if the cost itself is
there is a mentality that
on a
people,
breakdown.
when I ask them why they're using plastic, there is a well, we can't use wood, and you're like, what do you mean you can't use wood? Well, it doesn't last, and so there has been a taking over of the market that, with these producers saying, well, if you really want it to last, you need to do plastic or cement. Cement board is expensive, and so it's not a cost thing. There's a mentality of longevity, and my thing is that look, we've kind of gone down a rabbit trail, but I'm saying if you build wood, there are ways to introduce things into the siding, air gaps and other things like that, to make the wood last any time equally as long as the crap. Okay, longer, and more traditional, and better for the environment and everything else. So,
well, then by that standard, then this is right? The alternative has proven itself for over 4,000 years. It's called traditional building.
Yeah, I was just saying. I started that by saying there's a consequence to our society that people won't. Not as many people will be able to own a house because the houses will be more expensive in general. You would push back on that. I still say that that's true, and I don't think people care enough about the environment, care enough about the ecological to, pay for the fact that, well, I'm going to live in an apartment now because, I can't afford a house. Anyway, it's just there is that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's what I think the consequences to his solution are tough to swallow, especially for Americans, because we're we want what we want, and we just, we go after it. So anyway.
So just to communicate what Austin just said, our Optimist producer just pointed out some great stuff. Instead of an apartment building back in the future looking like how it looks today, which is modern and plasticky and mishmash of concrete,
and just these odd shapes.
There's a chance that if we push back against the traditional building, or for the traditional building,
you'll have more beautiful places that people can live in.
And maybe you won't own a home,
but the environment around you will be gorgeous and beautiful.
You can still have.
I still don't think Americans would put up with that.
I still don't think they even know like that even exists.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you show those two pictures, it's obvious where you'd like to live.
Yeah, the first one.
I think, I think that it's
first month's free. That's why.
It's true.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how they get you.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff.
So, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think Americans will want that, barring some sort of culture shift.
Well, culture shift and a mind shift. You got to change your mind.
But I think that's why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah,
100%. We're trying to get people to think differently about how we're building, 100%. So they quit building crap.
I think like we've been doing this now for a year. If you were to go back and talk to me a year ago to now, like my mind has even shifted. Yeah. I know that's a triglyph for sure.
My mind has shifted as well. I know those columns have entasis. So
nice.
And what else do you notice about those columns?
They don't have a base.
They don't have a base, which would make them
colonnades.
Doric, Tuscan,
Greek Doric.
Oh, okay.
Nice. The Greek typically didn't have the bases. There are Roman Doric bases without columns without bases, but it's typically Greek.
And the fluted.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, I think we're leaving it there where this is the ideal. It is interesting to know that this exists in England and like across the pond, that there is this. Like, I think even that alone should light up some American fuel in you to go, why can't we have that?
So Quinlan Terry, just real quick to finish it up, I found out about a house. There's the man, and he hand draws everything. The other thing he does is he wouldn't draw. He wouldn't when he built that Muse house. He wouldn't do any of the modern spaces. So he didn't do the bathroom or the kitchen. He only did the traditional spaces. He can be a little bit of a snob, because this next story is there's a couple in Fort Worth who's just a train wreck of a couple, but they had a ton of money. And
Shout out.
And they went out to interview with him. And before the Muses ended up hiring Quinlan, and he was going to build a house on this 7-acre property right around from our house. And they were going to build this fabulous Quinlan Terry. Well, the wife was like, anyway, she was nutball, crazy, and the husband was running around and doing things. They were just this stupid rich couple.
Don't worry, they're listeners. They're listeners.
But they wanted. They're not even in Fort Worth. They're not even in Fort Worth anymore. And so they.
We know him well.
But they had hired Quinlan to do their house. And then they got divorced and everything else. And one reason
we've narrowed it down.
One reason he wasn't going to do the Muse house is because of the experience he had with this couple in Fort Worth.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
These Americans suck.
Really
there's some to do, but he's done a lot of Colonial Williamsburg, and he's done a lot of stuff in America.
We've had our horror story episodes. We know that they're bad clients. Oh my gosh, look at that.
So
look how simple that is.
Yeah.
That is so nice.
It just looks so good. He's the man. He might be my favorite modern architect.
Yeah, he's very, very good.
Cool. Well, thanks for watching this episode of the Passion for Craft podcast. Hopefully you've got some things to take home and yell at your friends about for using double pane glass.